This contact occurred through an entity he initially thought was an imaginary friend but later discovered there was something else taking place. Somehow the military-industrial complex learned Stone was having ongoing contact with otherworldly beings and began to watch him closely. As a young man, Stone was keen to join the armed service so he could patriotically serve his country. In 1968, shortly after he graduated high school, while the Vietnam War raged, he was contacted by the draft board in his area and told to report to the Armed Forces Entrance Examination Station in Ashland, Kentucky. Stone was examined last at the request of the captain and doctor, who knew he had medical issues and suggested he tour the D.C. area to avoid disqualification. Upon his return, he was put through the usual battery of physical and mental evaluations and passed most with ease, save the medical portion. Stone had an undisclosed medical condition that the Army concluded was severe enough to disqualify him. He was told as much at the time, but Stone didn't take no for an answer. He appealed to the captain and said that a lot of people drafted into the Army didn't want to go, especially since the Vietnam War was claiming a lot of American lives at the time. Those who were unwilling to serve need not die if he could enlist in their place, he said. The captain informed Stone that he could push his application through, but that he needed to avoid detection for 179 days. On the 180th day, Stone would be locked in and the Army will acknowledge his medical condition, but still allow him to serve. Stone subsequently entered the service and passed through the 180-day trial period. Shortly after his arrival in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, he began his training as a typist. At one point, while he cleaned up an intelligence section of the headquarters building there, a military man from Washington, D.C. approached him. He started a conversation with Stone and informally asked him what he thought about UFOs. Stone responded by saying he hadn't given it much thought, to which the man said he did believe in UFOs and proceeded to show Stone several top-secret documents. Stone felt uncomfortable because he lacked the proper clearances and said as much to his new friend. The man answered and said everything showed to Stone was authorized, suggesting that the whole encounter was some covert evaluation or recruitment exercise. Stone believes that the military discovered he had ongoing contact with visitors and wanted to recruit him into a particular ultra-secret branch of the service that required civilian assets. Individuals receiving contact with extraterrestrials since childhood have a rare skill set for what Stone calls interfacing, a form of telepathic communication. This method of communication is so foreign to what the average person can comprehend that secret space programs had to go to great lengths to find and recruit civilians with these abilities. Stone states that his work involved interfacing with entities at extraterrestrial crash sites or those detained by the military for various reasons. Non-terrestrials that are highly telepathic in nature can only initiate contact with an individual who has prerequisite levels of skill, according to Stone. To find and recruit civilians capable of handling the psychological impact of extraterrestrial contact and also possess the required interfacing skill was no easy task. Stone shares that a very small population of people are eligible for such a position, but due to the nature of the role, forced recruitment wasn't as effective, and therefore, not possible at least during his time in the programs. Interfacers needed to buy into the interfacing experience entirely, and as such, the military devised methods of slowly grooming recruits to participate willingly. Enticing these individuals ranged from appealing to their sense of patriotism to outright payoffs or financial compensation. When Stone left the service, he was one of only 7 interfacers, suggesting that the available store of individuals for this task was very small indeed. Stone was recruited into the 36 Civil Affairs Company of the 96 Civil Affairs Group at Fort Lee, Virginia, and received specialized training in communication systems and protocols. In February of 1969, while attending his training, he was shown a film that presented the capabilities of advanced top-secret satellite reconnaissance systems in orbit some 500 miles above the surface of the Earth. It showed a series of images beginning at a far-off vantage point of the North American continent, with each successive image focusing on a single location on the ground. The magnification of this satellite was so high that by the end of the picture presentation, Stone could see the headline of a newspaper a man sitting on a bench in Central Park, New York was holding. Stone discovered later in his research that the National Reconnaissance Office had these satellites in place for some time, most likely well before this presentation occurred. After completing his training, he met a man he referred to as Jack, who worked for the U.S. Army Security Agency, as well as the National Security Agency, NSA. Stone's ticket back to his unit in Fort Lee, Virginia, had somehow been stolen, and Jack offered to drive him back. Again, a strange conversation ensued wherein the NSA man asked Stone about UFOs and wondered if he believed in them or had seen one. Stone said he had seen strange objects in his time but kept them quiet, to which his driver came back and stated that it is okay to talk to him as they were friends. Several weeks later, Stone receives a phone call from Jack who suggested that Stone come to Washington, D.C. for a holiday and tour of the Pentagon. Jack sent a staff car to Stone's base to collect him. Stone is taken to Jack's office at the NSA headquarters only to discover that he is not there. Another man greeted Stone and asked if he wanted to tour the Pentagon while they wait, to which Stone agreed. This man provided Stone a clearance badge that granted him access to certain classified sections of the facility. After he had descended an unknown distance, they arrived in a small room that opened up to a monorail system in the basement of the Pentagon, with a single bullet-shaped car in view. The man told Stone that the tram system is an interconnected set of tunnels or tubes that use electromagnetic propulsion to move a vehicle along the track, which Stone had never seen before. After they had traversed an unknown distance, they arrived at a long corridor with no doors or openings on either side. Stone was a bit confused by what he saw, as the hallway was very long and ended abruptly with no discernible purpose. It seemed like a corridor that didn't lead anywhere. As they walked, his escort told Stone a lot of things aren't the way they seem. The man then referred to the same hallway both of them were walking through at the time, implying that it wasn't what it seemed. The man tapped on the wall, and said, "Solid wall, right?" And before Stone could respond, the man pushed him into what looked like a solid wall. As Stone recovered from this jolt, he realized that he was on the other side of the wall in another room. At the other end of the chamber was a typical gray extraterrestrial that sat on the far side of a table with two men in dark suits standing on either side. After taking stock of where he was, Stone began to feel a buzzsaw sensation in his head, and quickly lost consciousness, and fell to the floor. Stone later awoke to find himself back in Jack's office and was promptly told nothing happened, he hadn't actually left, and that he must have dreamt the whole encounter. He believed that the event was a conditioning or training exercise specifically designed to show him that there were things people weren't supposed to believe in but were actually real, and that the military knew of extraterrestrials but didn't want the public to know. That the need for secrecy was great, and part of Stone's duty to his country was to keep these things quiet. Later in Stone's military career, he had another initiation into the secretive world of UFO crash retrievals. During a field training exercise at Fort Indiantown Gap, he was manning the communications switchboard in the back of an Army truck, known colloquially as a deuce and a half or a 2.5-ton standard-issue carbo truck. After performing the usual training scenarios, at around midnight, Stone's unit got word of an alleged downed aircraft that fell in the Indian reservation at Indiantown Gap. They were dispatched to the location as a backup unit, entering under the cover of night in blackout dry form, meaning, the truck convoy used no artificial lighting. Stone's unit arrived to find a UFO crash site, lit by powerful overhead lights. After greeting the military first responders on the scene, they told Stone that the object was an experimental aircraft design. Stone didn't think to question the explanation and was unsure of what he was seeing. The colonel in charge asked Stone if he had a Geiger counter for measuring radiation and requested Stone to take readings of the downed craft, which he was to communicate back as he walked. Stone grabbed his APD-27 Geiger counter and began walking in the direction of the saucer, providing radiation readings as he went. As he walked, the radiation levels were within safe ranges, but he could not see one side of the craft. When Stone got close enough to see the other side of the UFO, he was shocked by what he saw. He came upon a little grey ET about 3 to 4 feet in height that had spilled out of the craft's hatch and was clearly dead. As Stone recalled this memory, he was overwhelmed by emotions and said he felt intense sensations as a result of what he saw. He called out to the unit and asked for an officer to approach. The colonel instead responded by asking Stone to describe what he was seeing. Stone eventually said, "It's not from this world, you know what I am seeing." He yelled out in frustration, "Why the hell are we lying? Why are we telling people that these things aren't happening?" The colonel asked him to come back to the unit, at which point Stone confronted the commanding officer demanding to know why they were there and expressed concern about other Greys potentially injured inside the downed craft. The colonel told Stone to go to his comms station in the truck, which he did. The next day, the object was placed on a flatbed truck and moved to a secret location, never seen again by Stone. He was told it was an unmanned experimental craft, apparently a cover story. Stone adds that for interfacers like him, these encounters are very intense as feelings and images come through the interface experience. Corey Goode and David Wilcock review Stone's testimony and offer comment. They both discuss how Stone's testimony has all the hallmarks of authenticity, such as truthful body language, extraneous details, and consistency. Instead of sharing a narrative focused only on the points of interest, Stone offers more detail than is needed, in a way that typically happens during memory recall. His eyes remain fixed and centered as points are remembered, without diverting to the right side of the body usually associated with the right brain and creative centers used to fabricate information. Also, Stone has not gained monetarily from whistleblowing, and Wilcock claims that Stone's son was killed in connection with his outing. Goode states that the kind of abilities Stone has are similar to the intuitive empaths in the secret space program. Goode was trained to interface with extraterrestrials and the like during his time with the program as well, confirming that during this era of development, training these kinds of abilities was not possible. As a result, and in confirmation of Stone's testimony, Goode shares that they would have needed to recruit individuals out of the civilian sector, as Stone said. Similar to Goode's experiences, Stone was a so-called targeted individual, someone that the military-industrial complex was actively monitoring because they knew he had extraterrestrial contact at an early age. Goode adds that the military has long had the ability to track extraterrestrial spacecraft and contacts so as to find and groom these people into the program. Part of this process could involve the abduction of individuals after they make initial contact with extraterrestrials, to determine the nature and content of what took place. Goode and Wilcock suspect that the peculiar nature of Stone's recruitment into the Army, despite his medical disqualifications, as well as the strange conversations with various figures regarding UFOs, was part of his grooming and preparation for special service. Stone's encounter in Washington, D.C. with the Grey under the Pentagon was most likely a test to determine how he handled the strange nature of the program, and if he could be trusted to keep a secret. The program probably manufactured most of his supposedly friendly encounters with UFO-wise military personnel in an effort to prepare him for his final initiation into secret government projects. Goode describes that during an interfacing or telepathic communication experience, words and phrases are not used to transmit information. Instead, all manner of subjective sensations is available, such as smells, images, sounds, and feelings. Part of an interfacer's job is to learn how to translate these nonverbal signals into a communication stream with the skills needed to ensure clear communication takes place. But this exchange is unlike a vocal or written language process. The NRO satellite technology shown to Stone is just one of the many advancements developed by the programs, according to Goode. Handlers probably showed this technology to Stone as a test to determine if he was able to keep it secret, along with other elements of his early ventures with secret military projects. Analysis. As Goode states during his analysis, the early SSP used organic skill sets, for lack of a better term, emerging within the civilian population. The need for individuals who were capable of communicating telepathically with beings who use nonverbal communication techniques was probably great. But there are setbacks involved. Telepathic versus linguistic communication. Note, I have studied the following psychological concepts in depth for most of my life, but lack background knowledge used by professionals in this field. As such, I will do my best to describe things in accepted scientific terms and only rely on inventions of articulation when needed. The conceptual framework or basis is comparable, however. The way the mind organizes experiences and ideas are universally dependent on the syntax of our use of language. The formative years of development solidify what are called models within the psyche that shape how we conceptualize and process information. These models provide a framework for the mind to generate a subjective experience that is the lens through which we experience reality. Language, in particular, is an abstraction concerning the raw data of experience, creating a collection of metaphysical structures within the mind that require mental energy to maintain. That is to say, the experience of a thing and the verbal expression of it are two different things. Our description of memory is a facsimile that can be likened to a thumbnail or partial image of the more complete and replete experience. Direct experience or raw cognition is the unfiltered data stream or first-order impression of the sensory data from the central nervous system, material body, emotional data, and intellectual insights and ideas. All these things combine to form a holistic image or impression, what we refer to as a memory. This memory contains not only a physical description of what happened but also how we felt during the time, as well as any conclusions or meanings we gleaned from the experience. By focusing on raw experience, the process of creating a memory, a holistic image impression, unfolds as follows. The hindbrain or reptilian brain, the R complex, absorbs sensory data and funnels it up through the brain stem for processing. The energetic or astral body receives emotional data in a precognitive fashion via the heart-brain, which has been well documented by HeartMath and other researchers. This metaphysical, emotional data is translated into a broth of neurotransmitters produced in the midbrain, mammalian brain, or limbic system, which is a physical or material version of the metaphysical emotion. As an example, endorphins is a neurotransmitter responsible for the physical sensation of pleasure and happiness. The three data streams, physical, emotional, and intellectual, are recorded into consciousness as a single memory or a first-order readout of whatever was experienced. The process of describing an experience using language requires that it be broken up into bite-sized chunks or threads wherein a single idea or concept can be shared. For example, observing a sunrise is an experience with a seemingly infinite number of observational data points, not to mention emotional sensations and intuitive impressions. Simply describing what the sun looked like as it rose would require a great deal of descriptive languages, such as the color of the sky, if there were clouds, and so on. And even then, due to the subjective nature of language meanings, the actual image rendered in another person's mind may be completely different, even though the same general elements are present. Also, an experience itself is holistic in nature. The color of the sky can't really be divorced from other aspects of the sunset scene. And yet, we have to start somewhere when describing our experiences. We can't download information to another all at once. As a result, this means that articulation via language of any image within the mind is always a left brain process of dissection followed by a right brain process of creation. We break up our experiences into bite-sized chunks and then assemble these into strings of words and phrases that can be decoded by others for meaning. The most we can hope for is to describe a hazy impression of one element at a time. Imagine describing a three-dimensional object by taking a series of photographs around it, which another person can look at to get an impression of what it might be. All of this is what is required to translate our raw experiences into forms of communication. Articulating experience using language forces a homogenization of the first-order information into distortions, much like the way a video homogenizes color gradients into single planes. A progressive distortion of experience occurs as a result of this modality of communication, leading to an ever-increasing level of abstract and convoluted thought. Consider that watching a sunrise may only take 60 seconds, but describing it to someone using words could take volumes of text if we want to clearly and completely communicate what happened. And the amount of mental energy and programming required to communicate in this way is incredibly draining on the psyche when compared to telepathic forms of communication. According to Goode, Stone, and many others who discuss telepathic races and contacts, entities exchange first-order information or holistic image impressions of experience as a language itself. For human beings, we rely on meaningless symbols, words, to associate concepts to that can then be used to assemble facsimiles of experience for communication purposes. The phrase "the sun is yellow" is an assembly of individual word symbols, combined in a contextual framework so as to describe one facet of an experience. Each line of text or dialogue adds one more layer detail into a receiving person's mind. Presumably, telepathic forms of communication are more pictorial in nature, based on complete images and impressions closer to direct sensory data or experience itself. Validation of this premise comes via the testimony of Stone and Goode, who both state that interfacing with telepathic beings requires one to use subjective experience itself as a form of language. That is to say, describing a sunrise to someone using telepathic means only requires sending an image of it into another person's mind. This image would be much more complete and detailed than a linguistic version, requiring much less abstraction and effort over time to transmit. Attempting to memorize a random string of words is harder than assembling them into a story. Therefore, the more efficient we are in transmitting ideas to other minds, communication, the more energy is left to expand consciousness into other areas. In this way, linguistic communication is like the snail mail of articulation. Yes, we can get the job done, but it takes a lot of energy. Given that telepathic species rely on this direct image transference process, they probably conceptualize in a different way than we do and most likely express ideas as holistic images instead of only the logical abstractions used in linguistics. Consider mathematics, which, although it is a powerful tool for discerning reality, is so abstract most people can't comprehend it fully. But holistic images that contain physical, emotional and intellectual data are unified by nature, not able to be divorced, and as such, miscommunication is probably much less common in telepathic species. If true, this could suggest that ancient megalithic cultures who often had a mythos of an extraterrestrial nature were more telepathic than modern humans today. Within the framework of Stone and Goode's testimony, these points are important for understanding why the programs required individuals with a history of telepathic contact. The work of psychologists such as Joseph Chilton Pearce, Michael Mendiza, and Bruce Lipton suggests that the human organism is pre-programmed or conditioned for holistic thought. Children absorb and process information holistically at a very early age, and are trained to think abstractly via the enculturation process, specifically about the use and development of language. But if one makes contact with a telepathic species early enough, holistic thinking and image processing can advance alongside the acquisition of linguistics, enabling such individuals to interface with telepathic species. Another hindrance to contemporary humanity and the use of telepathic communication is the destruction of the imagination, which at an early age is innately powerful. However, imaging devices, such as televisions, smartphones, computers, video games, and so on, replace internal imaginative processes with external images, eventually atrophying the mental processes responsible for creating coherent and definite mental images. As a result, the average adult possesses almost no ability to imagine, let alone form coherent image streams clear enough for telepathic species to comprehend. Thus, in our quest to unlock telepathic abilities, we may discover that our reliance on technology for imagination and conceptualization holds us back. If the capacity to transmit mental images to others manifested in humanity overnight, most of us would lack the mental discipline needed to form complete picture streams that others could understand. We would most likely use these powers to transmit words and phrases instead of holistic images, a kind of mental linguistics, with the same limitations as verbal or written forms. But over time, we could eventually use the more efficient holistic images, if we slowly abandoned our dependencies on imaging technology. Another point to consider regarding telepathic contact is that people can and do experience it despite the aforementioned setbacks. The form this contact takes seems to vary from direct images and impressions, like what long-standing telepathic species employ, to verbal messages or communications, such as channeling. Additionally, the use of artificial telepathy like voice-to-skull devices as well as nefarious telepathic species who refuse to acknowledge the prime directive of honoring free will, so to speak, also seem to be a factor. In these cases, the information received by an individual may feel like it is coming from their inner voice or even some higher intelligence, like an angel. The form of these telepathic communications also varies in the same ways mentioned above, i.e. holistic image transmission or verbal messages. All of this makes discerning telepathic contact from normal thought streams and insights difficult. However, the content of a communication, what it has to say, is where our powers of discernment are the most effective in judging if something is true or not, and if it is practical for us to integrate into our belief system and worldview. As always, discernment is advised. Before the development of advanced mental interfacing training, like what Goode described in a previous episode, it is hard to find individuals in society capable of cognizing experience in a way that made telepathic contact possible. And as was stated earlier, children have an innate ability to cognize the world in visual impressions and holistically integrated images wherein a memory contains all sensory and emotional data in a singular form. As we learn a language and begin to enculturate, abstract ways of thinking distort and eventually retard this holistic imaging ability. However, it appears that contact with extraterrestrial beings at an early age prevents this retardation process from taking place. As an aside, I suspect that autistic children are resistant to this enculturation effect, and tend to develop thought patterns which are more holistic in nature, making communication with normal humans difficult. Therefore, if children possess an innate ability to think and cognize information holistically, this would make them ideal candidates for extraterrestrial interfacing. Stone's contact with extraterrestrials, described in more detail in his bio, suggests that telepathic beings approached him from a very early age. At one point they told him that he was the subject of a cultural study of their race and that this group who was observing him would do so for the rest of his life, adding significantly to their knowledge of humanity. These experiences were clearly of immense importance to the early SSBs, who did not possess, or possibly understand, the methods by which individuals interface with telepathic beings. For Goode, he learned his intuitive empathy skills later on in the SSB's development. Although, even he states that some level of innate ability must be present for the training to proceed. In addition, Goode reported that he and his fellow trainees began their education at an early age, suggesting that the programs discovered this innate holistic imaging ability in certain children. Through the use of visualization training and mind enhancement, graduates' interfacing capabilities were improved such that they could communicate with extraterrestrials telepathically. In other words, later SSBs did not have to rely so heavily on the small population of individuals who were experiencing ongoing extraterrestrial contact, although Goode intimates that this was still a factor for recruitment. The so-called Military Abductions Program, MILAB, according to several alleged insiders, frequently targets individuals contacted by extraterrestrials, grooming them to become assets for one project or another. Stone's testimony is a case study of this recruitment process. Recruitment of Stone. Stone's testimony regarding his early experiences and recruitment suggests that these programs were already developing advanced psychological manipulation techniques. Litmus tests or gateway examinations were almost certainly manufactured by Stone's handlers to determine his abilities and take stock of his development. By this I mean, a set of experiences was engineered for him in such a way as to test Stone's reactions to certain situations. For example, the military officer who showed him classified documents did not reveal to Stone that he was authorized to see them. Stone responded to the situation by saying he did not possess the proper clearances and did not want to violate national security. This response would indicate to his handlers that Stone had a genuine interest in following orders and doing what he was told, despite any moral objections, which is an essential part of any compartmentalized project dealing with morally ambiguous situations. A requirement of more advanced service in the programs would have been to determine if Stone could keep a secret, which this case provided a test for. The encounter with the Gray in the basement of the Pentagon also seemed to be part of his conditioning and testing. Exposure to things not typically encountered in life, such as holographic walls, was a test of his psychological resistance. Some individuals lack the personal resolve to accept something that seems impossible or unbelievable, resulting in a mental break. Exposing Stone to the Gray in the way they did ensured the potential maximum psychological trauma, which was a Rubicon methodology, a test that either makes or breaks him. Stone would either handle the experience well, and accept what was offered without causing a break, or he would suffer extreme trauma and dissociate. In the latter case, Stone could have gone crazy and began trying to tell the public about what he saw, at which point, the program would have to deal with him, most likely by memory wiping or even assassination. But Stone showed resolve and adaptation to disturbing encounters, making him a viable candidate for this kind of service. As an aside, I suspect that the use of psychedelics and related forms of stimulation in the programs are to test how much novelty can be assimilated by an individual. Experiences that are too new can often be jarring and traumatic, but through mystical encounters for which psychedelics provide a comparable experience can increase one's capacity to process new things, to the point where even the most wildly fantastic experiences can be readily accepted and integrated. Emotional intensity of Stone's testimony. The nature of Stone's early extraterrestrial contact seems to have established a deep psychological and social bonds with his visitors. Described in his bio, Stone shares that as a child, he saw an imaginary friend who he at first thought was just another boy. He later discovered after accidentally killing a small bird that the being was not human after all, at which point it revealed himself to Stone in a careful way. Stone says he was horrified by this discovery at first, but after more transparent contact had continued, this being explained his race's true intentions of observation and cultural study. The nature of this contact, as was described earlier, was primarily telepathic. the being was able to communicate images, sensations, and feelings that were most likely incredibly intense and stimulating. His parental and other human interactions were dull by comparison, establishing a profound set of foundational experiences for telepathic contact early in life. Thus, he most likely formed models for empathy due to these otherworldly beings more so than his normal human interactions. As a result, the fraternal nature of their friendship, and tenderness felt, stayed with him throughout his life. Consider that the bonds of a child with those they love, especially those who maintain a pure and loving relationship with the child, are incredibly strong. As a result of these foundational interactions, a kind of deep reverence and love for extraterrestrials developed. When encountering the downed spacecraft at Indian Town Gap, Stone presumably experienced a deep sense of empathy, not only from the interface itself but also due to his pre-existing set of empathic experiences with his earlier visitors. This empathic experience is most likely why, some 60 years later, in recalling these memories he still feels an upwelling of strong emotions. He felt deep empathy and sadness for the dead Gray, he says, during his training mission as a comms officer, who probably reminded him of his earlier contact experiences as a child. MILAB's connection. Stone's testimony is important to consider for several reasons. It supplies corroboration to accounts provided by Goode and others, especially about so-called MILABs or military abduction programs. While MILABs are hardly a new concept in the archives of ufology, the possible motives for carrying out abductions of individuals experiencing extraterrestrial contact remains elusive. If Stone's testimony is true, it suggests that one possible motivation is the recruitment of intuitive empaths for use in secret space programs. Stone's testimony also offers a description of the limitations of SSBs. In this case, that making contact with extraterrestrial groups, largely dependent on telepathic communication, was a serious issue within the programs. So much so, that they were willing to recruit and groom civilians in ways that were kinder than some of the more invasive mind control techniques used in other areas. Ancient Cabal enslavement methods stunted our capacity for telepathic contact. Goode described in a previous episode that the Cabal had used occulted means of manipulating humanity and those within their ranks for generations, reaching far back into history. Several works proffer histories of humanity that claim we possessed telepathic abilities in times of old. The Christian Bible offers one account that lends credence to this notion, also echoed by other works. During the fall of Babylon, as part of God's wrath, he confounded the one language of the people who dared to build a tower to heaven. Here is quote from Genesis 11:1, 4, which reads, "And the whole earth was of one language, and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." To be clear, this quote merely indicates an element within our collective mythos describing a time when humanity had one language. We can allegorically interpret this message as follows. Through the construction of a city and tower, a divorce from nature, along with the creation of a name, an abstract linguistic concept, these people were eventually scattered about the earth and their language was broken into many different tongues. Perhaps this story is a reference to megalithic cultures, like the Egyptians, Olmecs, Sumerians, and so on. These civilizations used pictorial writing methods, suggesting more holistic thought, and were also more prolific in that they spread all over the planet. Several researchers have suggested that the glaring similarities between these cultures lead one to conclude that they came from a singular global civilization, the famed Atlantean civilization. In one such description of Atlantis, supplied by the book Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis, thousands of years ago there was a global civilization of highly advanced human beings, divided into two general philosophies. One group, known as the Sons of Belial, wanted to enslave their fellow human beings, forming an elite priesthood who hid knowledge from the masses so as to manipulate them. This group needed to create more and more separation from their fellow human beings so as to confuse them more efficiently. A second group, known as the Children of the Law of One, sought to restore the human family and its proper place in the cosmos at large. We are told in the book that the first group won out and eventually were successful in dividing the people amongst themselves. In the process, we lost the capacity to communicate telepathically, along with a host of other problems that plague humanity to this day. While proving this history remains elusive, its conceptual elements can be used to understand the price that was paid for installing programs of separation in humanity so long ago. The Sons of Belial can be thought of as the forefathers of the SSP, who in their foolish desires for power ensured that later generations' ability to communicate with extraterrestrials were greatly reduced. And now, eons later, the Cabal have lost the capacity to make direct contact with their so-called extraterrestrial gods. Conclusions. Stone's testimony offers insight into the seemingly strange nature of the secret space programs and their activities. Often only the most matter-of-fact elements are discussed, such as human beings making contact with extraterrestrials via fantastic means. But these things can also lend insight into the truths of our existence and potentials as evolving souls within a universe founded on consciousness. Stone's accounts also detail limitations of the early secret space programs and their capacity to communicate with extraterrestrials. Often these secretive groups are attributed with seemingly all-powerful abilities, but in truth, we learned that they do have their constraints. And we also learned why the use of some forms of technology, mainly imaging systems such as television and computers, while providing us comforts and conveniences, hinder consciousness and its abilities instead of enhancing it. The more gadgetry we invent, the less we need to use and master our consciousness. And when considering the AI threat mentioned by Goode in the past, it suggests that the last 100 years of so-called technological innovation could be a preamble to a technocratic transhumanist age of enslavement, wherein the potential for organic imagination and enhancement of consciousness would be almost impossible due to an ever-present white noise of technology buzzing in the background. Consider how difficult it is to concentrate and focus in our world today, where we are constantly being bombarded with distractions in society. Thankfully, the truth once received pushes the limits of what we consider to be possible. If we can imagine a world free of nefarious groups, we are one step closer to making it a reality. As such, spending time now to develop our abilities to think holistically and imagine clearly are skills that can be used for empowerment in all respects, not just for telepathic communication. Thanks for listening and watching. Subscribe and share.